Welcome to the Juniper podcast, where we talk about the sometimes messy, emotional, and more nuanced aspects of being a dog parent. I'm your host, Allison, the founder of Juniper. You can find us at juniperpet.co to read more, download our free guides, and find the best emerging pet products. My co-host is Haley Young, dog mom of Scout and writer for Juniper, and her own website, Pause and Reflect. You can find that at pause, P-A-W-S, and reflect.blog. Let's get into it. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our first episode of the Juniper Dog Moms podcast. I'm super excited. Haley and I have all these kinds of conversations, and we want to start getting some of them recorded to share them with you because we think that we are not alone in how we feel about our dogs.
Absolutely. And we have both felt like maybe we're a little bit crazy for how much we love our dogs in the past. And it was one of the first things that we really bonded over, especially, starting this community of Juniper sort of designed just for dog moms like us. One of the first things that Allison told me about Juniper was that it was supposed to be a community for the kind of person who would throw their dog a birthday party. And that is such a fun thing and such a thing that I've heard so many people do, but also a thing that like my grandma would find just so absurd.
Right, exactly. So it's like, I think the first topic is like, are we crazy for loving our dogs as much as we do? I don't think so. But why do some people say that?
Oh, the questions that we'll never be able to fully answer. I'm not entirely sure where it comes from. I think that there's continuing to be such a shift. I mean, you see all of the headlines about millennials and Gen Z, and are we having fewer children? Are we getting married later? And everyone likes to pull out cause and effect and, look at this data conglomerate and see what's going on with it. I think that pets often get positioned as like this antithesis to traditional marriage or kids, as if, like how many headlines have we seen where it's millennials are having dogs instead of kids? And there's sort of this pushback, I think, when the information is presented that way from people where they're trying to make sure that it's like, well, your dogs aren't actually your kids. And so you're crazy for doing all of this for them that, you're not doing for a human child. At least sometimes in my circles, I feel like that's where some of it has ended up coming from. It's very strange.
I know, and I really don't feel like it's like one or the other. I think it's just that things have changed over time. Like, I don't think it's as much just what are we doing, but I think it's also just, I think about like the dog that my parents had when I was growing up, who was like a totally untrained beagle who ran wild, ran away twice. And, when I would tell my mom, who's in her 70s now, about like all the training I was doing with Addie, she was like, what? You're doing all this training? We just had a dog. I think it was just sort of different back then.
I think that's such a great point. And oh my goodness, my personal experience is so similar. We had two Bichons who I like to say that they were poorly trained, but deeply loved. Like, we just adored them. They were great family dogs in my perspective at the time. But in hindsight, I look at how we lived with them and it just blows my mind, the things that I take for granted now in life with Scout, the things that I've learned about training, even just like basic things that I had never considered. Like, they were so overweight and we just thought they were well loved, right?
Love is the thing that you need for your dog, and that's the only thing, right? Like, yeah. I think even before I got Addie, that was one of the things that I kind of went into it. I was just like, well, I know I can love her a lot, and it's like, well, that's not everything. And then that was something that really brought me into dog world a lot more.
Oh, yeah. Once again, how I relate. I feel like that's just my go-to answer every time you say anything, because again, we have such similar emotional journeys, I feel like, with our dogs, even though Addie and Scout are, vastly different individual creatures. I desperately wanted for love to be enough. And, the question is like, are we crazy for loving our dog so much? And I think that opens up an interesting part of the discussion about what love even means and what it looks like. And maybe that's where some of the differing opinions here even come from, because we're all using the word love in slightly different ways. So like, I've been told by well-intentioned, to be clear, but like I've been told by some family members before that like I love Scout too much. Like, I'm too invested. I stake too much of my own identity in her. Like, Scout having a setback with her fear reactivity or a bad experience can just derail my whole mood. And in that context, I think I can understand a little bit more why these people who love me are telling me, hey, like, you care too much. It's unhealthy for you. But I think that, yeah, a lot of it comes down to the semantics of how we're using those words. Like, I don't think that I love her too much or care too much. I love that I love her so much and that I have this big care and concern for her. I just think that it's been a process of, handling that in a healthy way. So the love is still there. And like, I will jump through any hoops for her. I mean, we live in a 70 square foot converted van that was designed around fitting her dog crate. Like that was the first thing we put in the design. So clearly she's front and center in a healthy way, like the way that I would want someone to love me. And there's nothing at all wrong with that.
Well, and I think part of like when you and I were talking about the beginning of Juniper and like, how could we write content or put out content about dogs that hasn't just been done a million times over, felt like, and still feels like the thing that's new is talking more about our connection with our dogs. So it's not just like how to train a dog, how to do this or that with a dog. We felt like there was already like a lot of resources for that, but fewer resources for like, how are you doing with your dog? Like, how are you dealing with training and like, how is it affecting you? And actually, there's so much interplay between getting to know ourselves to be good guardians to these pets. And then also, I think just in general, the amount that we know about dogs is still changing and growing all the time. Like I've learned so much from you, and then we're trying to put this out in Juniper, and it's like, I think that there's a lot of support that people still really need. And so I think this idea that like, I had no doubt that like I would just love my dog and that she would be spoiled and have everything she needs. I was very like confident in that. And it's like, I think that's how a lot of like new dog parents are, you're like, well, that's it, right? That's basically it. Just cuddle them and love them forever, that's sort of like the idea of thinking that this is going to be like a newborn, like all it needs is love and care and attention. And a puppy is actually like totally the opposite. If anything, it's running around. It needs to be trained. It needs boundaries from day one. You're like, and for the case of me with my dog, is like, I was crying 6 months in because I was like, is she ever going to cuddle with me? Is she ever going to show me affection? She's just rambunctious, I think a lot of people have this stuff about dogs. It's like, why we're going to write the puppy 101 guide. And a lot of this is going to come up too. Right. So some of this is about having a young dog, but I also just think it's as we develop, how we relate to our dogs, like how we're made to feel crazy for even thinking this much about them. But I think that the trend and the understanding of where we're going to be at for how we treat animals in 10 years is even going to look vastly different than it does today. And this is going to look like the beginning of a lot of this. That's my theory and idea about where things are going.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I feel like one of the things that was so helpful for me when I was consuming some of that initial content, like I got Scout as an adult, but I was similarly very overwhelmed. And I went into it thinking that I like sort of knew what I was doing. Like I had done a lot of training work with my family's husky, and that was my very initial step into the world. But it was so different with this dog who was full-time my own, and this dog who is so timid and fearful. And we had all of these struggles. And one of the things that really helped me about content I consumed that actually stuck with me, that hit me in the right way, was that it validated first and foremost why I cared so much. And it validated why I desperately wanted to understand what was going on and address it in this sort of holistic way, because I really, really love this dog. Like I wasn't looking for old school training advice, which is just like, here's how you can stop a behavior. Like operant conditioning is a very valuable thing to understand if we want to be super interested in training, of course, but it's so superficial. It's not enough when you're really trying to build this relationship. So I wasn't looking for that, but I also wasn't looking for like the, love is all you need. Like just love them and give them all of these chew toys. And if they still aren't behaving the way that you want, give them more chew toys. Like that wasn't helpful either. And so there was this intersection of advice that resonated with me because it was practical, but also it just reinforced that it was okay that I cared so much. Like it was okay that I cared desperately about doing this well and about doing this right. And, there is no one right way to do it. Of course, that's a big lesson that I had to learn over time, but I was so heartened finding other people who cared about their dogs to the degree that I did and who wanted to invest that time in learning how to care for them and learning how to deepen that relationship. And it was weirdly difficult to find in the very, very beginning.
Absolutely. And I think like we talked a little bit about the generational differences between, even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. What was it like when we were growing up? How are we taking care of dogs? How do most people still think about taking care of dogs and how could we get better at it? And I think one of the goals for Juniper is like, can we just make can we make your dog's life and your life with your dog just a little bit better? What would be the easy way to do that? Can we just send you an email once a week where you're going to get some of these articles that are just going to give you some ideas for things you could do or be a little bit better? And I don't know why, but there seems to be this cultural idea that it's like whatever we learned about dogs growing up is just the truth about dogs. And the reality is that we learn more about them all the time. And why would it be not like anything else where we want to get better and better at it?
Definitely. I think that's key. And some of the myths are so pervasive. And then that's actually one of the times that I have been accused of being like over the top with my dog is when I have been challenging. I say challenging gently. Like I'm not much of a, come in hot and like get in arguments with people sort of person. But there have been times, especially like in person with older relatives, where I've sort of gently challenged some of what they had internalized about how to raise dogs from their time growing up. And that's definitely been one of the moments where I've been likely to be, told that I'm being over the top or that I care too much. But for me, it's just adjusting to new information at hand and it's choosing the kind of relationship that I want. I think that's also key. Like people are different and dogs are different. And I really want a lot of depth and connection in my relationships with people and with animals. And I feel like investing the time to really try to understand Scout so much and, do these things that might seem over the top. Like if someone is petting her in a way that I can tell that she doesn't like, I end the interaction, even if she's quote unquote fine, because she's uncomfortable and she still really struggles to remember that she has legs and to do that on her own. And to me, that's just second nature. And that's just, I care about you. I'm trying to help you learn that you don't have to stay in this moment that's uncomfortable. I don't want you to get pushed to the point where you feel the need to take it into your own hands. I don't buy into this idea that every dog has to be indiscriminately friendly and love being rubbed by everyone all the time and all of these things. And to me, it's just, of course I do that. I care about you. I love you. But there are definitely a lot of people out there who see that as like babying or, just again, over the top. Like, Haley, you're being crazy. Like you have too many standards. You have all of this. And I often come back to that idea that I want to love her the way that I want someone to love and care about me. Like, I want to feel.
And that what's so wild about that? And it sounds like you're talking about like advocating for your dog and getting really good at advocating for your dog. And that's something that like I've had to learn. And I think something that I think is so interesting about, going down this path where you become the type of dog parent that cares a lot like us and probably the people who would listen to a podcast like this. Welcome. One of the things that you learn is that like if I had thought before like, oh, I have pretty good boundaries, I know how to speak up for myself, and I don't really care about what people think, like that really got challenged when I had really out of control puppy and then adult dog who doesn't listen when she's on a leash or we're having a trouble or something. And so advocating for my dog really, for me, showed me like how much work I still had to do on that. And on those parts of myself. And so that was just like the beginning of realizing how much self-knowledge there is to unlock about having a dog is like, and how much growth we can have through things like that. So like, obviously, like I'm going to advocate for her and speak up to a stranger and tell them, no, I'm sorry, we don't do unleashed greetings or whatever, right? Like I was surprised at how much like people pleasing I still had in my personality at this age of my life. If you had asked me, I think thought I was further along than I was until I got a dog that I had to like speak up for. And to the point where I'm so not people pleasing that when I'm walking her, because we're still training on our walks, we still have some reactivity and things like that. I am fully on her the whole time. I won't even look at people. And sometimes I'm so on to training her and thinking about her and telling her what she needs to do. And then also looking at the person, and my interaction with them is so brief that it's just telling them no greetings, thanks, and then I'll walk away and I'll be like, man, like I wasn't very nice to them. Not that I wasn't nice, but like I didn't even think about that person because I was focused on her interaction. And I think that that's been like a real lesson for me in learning that like advocating for my dog has made me focused on like way less on like how I look or appear to people and way more on like what's right to get her training right. Like I think the ideal would be that you're walking down the street, you can easily say hi to everybody, be friendly, have a conversation, and we're getting there. Things have gotten like a lot better with that. But that was surprising to me that that would even come up. And we'll talk more about all the things that we thought having a dog was going to be like, and then the reality.
Oh yeah, that's coming.
But that's one of them for me.
Oh, once again, that I relate to that. I feel as though the process of training Scout and helping her navigate the world and learning all of these things taught me so much about myself, and not always things that I wanted to learn. Like, I'm happy that I've learned them, of course, but a lot of deep discomfort there in that process of realizing exactly what you said. Like, I thought I was better at boundaries than this. I thought I had done so much work on this part of me, on that part of me. And then here is this dog and this situation out in public or with a family member or wherever we are. And I'm feeling so insecure and so overwhelmed. And, again, like to the topic of this particular chat, like so crazy, so like I'm the odd one out. And it really did make me realize that a lot of those feelings were things that I thought I had worked through in different areas of my life that I just hadn't. And a lot of them have been things that I've felt for a really long time about all sorts of topics, things that I've been passionate about. And that my journey with Scout, because it's been so intense, because she's needed so much for me, so much more than I thought a dog would need from me when I first adopted one, it just really shed light on all of that and sort of brought it all to the front and made me actually confront it once and for all. Like I can remember, pretty much my whole life, I've always worried that I'm crazy for something that I'm doing. Like I like this too much, or I like that too much, or I got too excited about that, or, I'm too nerdy and interested in this. And I feel like that overall question of like, am I crazy for loving my dog so much is really this larger reflection of like, am I crazy for loving any of the things that I love so much? And of course, the answer is no. Like, how wonderful to be excited about things, how wonderful to be invested in things. But I would have told you 5 years ago that I knew that I had worked so hard on that and that I was proud of my enthusiasm and my dedication and my care. And the honest truth is that I wasn't. I was still so insecure about it. And it really did take a lot with Scout to sort of come to that realization that like I'm allowed to take up space all of the time. Not only sometimes, not only when I've been good enough, not only when the situation is perfect, right? Like I get to take up space my whole life. That is what it means to be alive. And I did not have that down like I thought I did.
Yeah, I love that. And I think like we'll take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk more about this idea of like growth around the things that we thought that we were, and then how our dogs showed us that we really weren't there yet. Ever wonder what you should be feeding your dog? I always say the best dog food is the one your dog will eat, that you can afford, and that your vet approves of. That's why we love Optimal here at Juniper. Their food meets European quality standards and is full of prebiotics, omegas, and superfoods that your dog will love. To save 20% with your Juniper discount, visit the link in our show notes. I'm wondering if there's other times or other examples that you felt like, I don't know, like you grew as a person from having your dog.
Oh yeah, basically every day for the last 5 years and a month, to be completely honest. I think especially I'm glad that you brought up advocating, because that is a huge thing that I've had to learn to do for Scout, and that I've realized that I haven't always been very good at doing for myself. And I think that that's part of why I struggled to do it for Scout. Like you mentioned, people-pleasing tendencies earlier, and I have certainly got those in spades. And I feel like there have been a lot of times where I've sort of tolerated discomfort of my own in a certain situation, usually a social situation, and have just sort of tried to like quiet it down and, not trust my gut and say that I should just like, I'm too sensitive, I'm too insecure, I'm all of these things. It's all in my head, that sort of deal. And in caring for Scout and seeing the validity of the different things that she's afraid of and uncomfortable with, and how intense the process can be to work through those things. Like progress is absolutely possible. And of course, that's something that we strive for. But I don't wake up the next morning after she's shown me that she's afraid of something and say like, get over it. You have to just be over it, right? I accept that these are very real feelings for her and I want to be on her team and work through it with her. And I wasn't even doing that for myself, you know. I would just sort of like hit myself over the head with like, stop it, Haley, like stop being so sensitive, stop being all of this. And then I felt so differently about Scout's sensitivity, and it opened it up for me to be able to see that like I'm also allowed to have these preferences and these struggles, and it's very important that I try to work through them healthily and that I'm, you know, a productive member of society and that I can engage in all of the social interactions, the different areas that I need to. But yeah, like I wasn't being very kind to myself for a long time.
Yeah, and it's okay that things take time.
Yeah.
Like I think that that extended time horizon is so important to give ourselves, and we just don't do it. Like I know that for myself I'll be like, "Oh, well something needs to change." So, I'll just change it. And it's just like, "Okay, that's nice in theory, but like it's actually going to be a process." I really realized that I was doing that in my own life too through taking care of my dog as well. You know, even recently I was kind of like, well, we did all the training around recall and she doesn't have recall. So I guess I either botched this training or she's never going to get it. You know, and I took like literally like took some time off of it. But it was part laziness of just like, okay, well, we did a ton of that training and it didn't work. And then frustration too. And it was giving up a little bit, you know? And so I went, you know, like back to the basics where I started watching a few videos again and learning about recall and seeing that many people were saying that it actually took them until their dog was 3 years old or something, you know? And so it's just like, okay, let's go back to the basics. Like, where can we practice recall where there's only a little bit of a distraction, you know? The other thing is like, I would just put her in the belly of the beast and be like, we're walking on, you know, a very busy pathway and I'm going to try recall. No, it's not going to work there. You know, I have to try it and I have to figure out how to break it down even more and try even less. You know, can she do it in a yard that she knows? I know she can do it in my yard. Can she do it in her friend's yard? And then she started doing recall, and I was like, oh, yeah, training isn't over. Like, training doesn't end. Now I'm taking her to an empty dog park. Will she do it in a new empty dog park? No, absolutely zero recall because the dog park is more interesting than anything I could be saying or doing or any treat that I could have. So it's just, okay, she's not ready for that piece yet. This is just going to take time. It's going to take way more time than I ever thought. That has all been really humbling because I think I kind of just thought that it was going to be like this checklist and that she would to some degree be this like robot dog. And if I just said the things enough, she would get it enough. And then when you really get into dog training and with your dog, depending, I guess, maybe not all dogs are, you know, some dogs like learn really fast, some have other things. You start to really like realize that this stuff can take a long time and that you'll be training for, and now I'm like in the mode mentally where I'm like, well, I'll be training forever. And I'm never going to say that she can't do something. You know, it usually means that like she can't do it yet, or I haven't trained it properly, or we just haven't put the reps in, or I stopped training for a little while because there's only so many hours in the day, you know? And so I think it's just been taking a much longer like time horizon to view that type of stuff has helped me a lot.
And it feels like thinking about that with her has helped you think about that with yourself too, and like goals that you've set as an individual.
Absolutely. It's like, okay, I don't need to do it. I don't need to do everything right away. What is this urgency? You know, like I lived in New York for 15 years. It's like urgency at all times. I ran a business for almost 10 years. Like, you know, there's urgency all around us and like pulling at us for everything. And so I think like being with this living being that's not a person and never going to speak, like that's the other thing too, is like how we think about our dogs. I think I thought that I was going to think about my dog kind of like a child too. And like we joke about that. Obviously, we spoil them. We love them so much. But the reality is like it became very clear, like this is because I have a cat who's 12 years old and I like train my cat, like whatever, you know, I knew how to be like a cat mom. Okay, that's a feline. This is a canine. Human is a human. These are all very different things. So while we joke about like being dog moms and like loving them as family and treating them as family, and obviously started this whole pet company, I also think, no, there's value in realizing the difference between, and you talk about this a lot, you know, like, okay, what does it mean for this canine to be a canine? How did they come up? Like what happened in evolution? You know, I love learning about that stuff. And so like getting more into that and learning about that as we work on the stuff for Juniper. And I've learned a lot about that from you too. It's like, how do we meet them kind of like where they are for who they actually are, I think is really important.
That makes me so happy. I like to call it species appropriate parenting. I think we all have different connotations with the word parent. And, I know some incredible dog guardians who love to be called dog parents. And I know others who would rather not use the term, whatever. There's all of those associations that we bring to the table personally. But I think that a lot of what we do whenever we are, caring for any creature who's dependent on us, to me, personally, that is a form of parenting. It's just, species appropriate parenting. I shall not raise my dog the way that I would raise a human, a primate, because we are totally different species and we have co-evolved together. And that's fascinating. And that, makes me feel less crazy for feeling so connected to her. I read an incredible book once that was called A Dog's History of the World. And it was basically just taking a look at the relationship of domestic dogs to human society throughout thousands and thousands of years. And it really validated how much I care about Scout and how connected I feel to her. And I love learning about those sorts of things, like understanding that people, thousands of years ago were caring about their dogs so much that they were having these really special graves and burying skeletons together, like a child holding her puppy, and like all of these amazing things. But also, sort of trying to strike a balance of sitting and being awash in that and loving that information, but reminding myself that even though we have this incredible history and that's so validating, at the end of the day, like, I am a human and she is a domestic dog, and I have to understand the different ways that we communicate. It doesn't negate the relationship at all. It doesn't negate the depth and the emotions that I feel, but it sort of keeps me grounded in the reality of like, what is a practical way to handle X, Y, or Z situation? And like, how can I do that with the backing of all of this love, but, in a way that ultimately makes sense to both of us with our different species tendencies, I guess.
I love learning about that too. And I feel like we could do a whole episode on sort of like the history, because I do think that that's really interesting. Like, I think that something that was really interesting to me in the year and a half that I've had my dog, sort of like a first time adult dog owner too, and then starting a whole company about dogs, was like, it's just been so awesome to have something that keeps me so present, and it feels so real and almost like ancient in a way, like you're describing. Like, it comes from something, okay, we've co-evolved together. So while we're like dramatic and we love our dog so much, and that's what this episode is about and everything, it's also natural. It comes from the natural world, and we did co-evolve together. And like, that is very interesting to me, because that felt like so right to me when I first got my dog and then got really into training and being with her, is that was like sort of surprising to me, that it's like I said, I expected to love her and go over the top, but it's almost like so different than I thought it was going to be, because it's more about how we're challenging each other and growing each other. And it's like way harder than I thought. And that's where this whole idea for Juniper came from, because I was sort of like, look, if I feel this way, there's no way I'm alone in this. There have to be other people who are like growing and being challenged by their dogs. And obviously I found you and other people who are like so generous at like sharing this part of things, instead of just the typical, like very topical things that people talk about with dogs, where it's just like rough, they do this, they do that. Like, it's like, oh, well, I find it to be very deep and ancient. And I have this little like guide that's with me. Like, and then also I found it to be, I think, like one of the trends I think that we're going to see, and like the reason that I started this into a company and everything, is because I really think like it's old, and like we have tons of history with this as human beings, living alongside animals, these animals, very special ones that we love. But then also I think that we're learning more about them than ever before, and kind of like unlocking some new things. And I think coming at a time when technology is advancing so much, pulling us like away from real life, I found that like Addie would always pull me into the moment and pull me into real life, like completely the opposite of what being on my phone is like. And that's really interesting to me. It's just like they're so real, and like you can't ignore them, and it's so fun and rewarding. And that reward is like not being hijacked by like a social media company that's trying to get us to click or doom scroll forever, right? And like I'm like so happy to have something that brings me into the present like that. I think that that's something like I've been really grateful for.
Yeah, the next time anybody says that you're crazy for loving your dog so much, just tell them that dogs follow human gestures from as young as 6 weeks old, even if they've never been exposed to humans before, and that the sound of a puppy or dog whining can activate the exact same hormonal response in you that listening to a human infant cry does. So if that is not evidence enough that this relationship is very real and has the potential to have such impact on us, I'm not sure what is. Like, we are wired to exist together, and that just continues to evolve as the world around us evolves, and that's why we're here.
Yeah, I love that. And I think started this episode with the question of like, are we crazy for loving our dogs? And I mean, my take is also just kind of like, you know what? Like, who cares? Like, who cares if people think that's too much? I know that there are millions of dog owners or dog parents out there that are like us and want to get better, want their relationship with their dog to be better, want to grow more as a person through and with their dog, and also just want to do a better job. Like, there are just people who want to do a better job. Sure, like, there's a hierarchy of needs. Your dog needs to be fed. It needs this, it needs that. But like, we're talking to the people who want to learn like why we're letting them go on a sniffy walk. You know, it's like, oh, I read somewhere, this was just like an example of something really small that I think we can share and spread in Juniper that will help people. It's like, I read, and I can't remember where I saw it, but it was like, the reason we let dogs sniff on a walk is because it's like them getting their social media feed for the day. It's how they get all their information, and it's like fun. It's like them reading their little newspaper or whatever. And once I started viewing it like that, I would literally let her sniff longer, because I was just like, well, this is her fun. This is what she's getting out and getting to do. You know, like, this is stimulating to her brain. Like, once I understood it, it made me so much more patient on a walk. And that was like just a small thing that like you learn, that I think like if we can share more things like that, like, you don't have to be crazy. You don't have to be like deep into dog nerd world. And like, you don't have to maybe get as deep into it as we are, but it's like that little thing and then that little adjustment can make such a difference in your dog's life and happiness. And like, why wouldn't we want more of that?
Those little empathy tweaks, I guess, to help think of things in our dog's perspective. And like you said, doesn't always have to be big, doesn't always have to be a ton of effort. That's one of the huge things I've learned. Like, love can look like so many things. I can do so many things for my dog, and a lot of them really aren't a huge deal in the grand scheme of my day in terms of like the resources that I have available to me. And I think that that's been a super important thing to learn.
It's like something we're thinking of all the time. Like, can this podcast be a podcast that you take on a walk with your dog? And that's just an easy way to like absorb thinking more about them and things, you know, tidbits you could get that would be helpful. Can you just open an email from us once a week? Like I said, joining Juniper is free. This is the plug. But it's like, that's sort of like what we're really aiming to do here, if you're going to read an article from the site or something like that. And so I think finding ways to make that really easy for people to pop in, and just, they're just going to get so much better and just get so much more out of their relationship with their dogs. Like, I'm really excited about continuing to build Juniper out basically for that reason. I think this topic is fun, and I could nerd out about it all day.
Also me.
I know. That's why I love you, and I'm so glad that I found you, and I'm so glad we're working on this together.
Me too. It's so energizing.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening to our first episode. Feel free to write to us and let us know what else you want to hear about. We're going to be back with a lot more soon. So thanks so much for listening. That's all for today. To learn more about your dog and discover the best hand-picked pet products, visit Juniper at www.juniperpet.co.